about slowing down. So many people try to do everything in one grant period. So it's a couple years, folks. Let's keep it within reason. Stay within the category you want. So for this particular fund, you can do everything in the pipeline from beginning to get stakeholders together, that capacity building, all the way to a $10 million restoration project. But try not to go from one thing to another. Let's see what you can do within a certain time frame. So it's a very exciting time. There's, this exchange, bringing people together, amazing. But just try to stick to the basics when it comes to following directions. There you go.
Sure. Echoing everything that's been said about details, that certainly is the key to a successful project. But for us, with our HUD mitigation program that serves 17 counties, that's a $162 million program. We have staged that program so that there were some projects that were ready to go right here in Charleston. The Earhart Tunnel project had a BCA that's out of this world. There's $10 million of HUD mitigation money going into that project. But we also have, with HUD, the focus on low to moderate income communities. And that is really a driver for us as we look at these projects. So we have towns as small as 60 folks. To get a BCA for a stormwater project against 60 folks is pretty tough, but we can get there. And we also, there are so many communities, the well-resourced communities can, as you've heard and as you know, can fill out a grant application. The under-resourced communities can't even get out of the box. And we, like Emily's team, we work with them to try and, draw the information out. But since probably the middle of this past year, we're now paying a nonprofit to help write these applications for the under-resourced communities. So we're paying them to provide the technical assistance, write the grant, and, they'll get into the door here at the next funding round. Because our next big funding round for infrastructure opens in the April to May time period, and we'll have a little over $50 million, we believe, left at that point for infrastructure. So, reaching out, grabbing hold of the under-resourced communities and pulling them in has been a key to our success. The other thing that we've done with those HUD dollars is across the 17 counties that we serve that were disaster impacted, we have a number of plans and studies that are out to engineering firms to work with local communities, work with their leaders, and go ahead and design the project. And at least it's designed, so it could be funded in our later rounds. So there's a sequence there that's been set up with this $162 million. We have 12 years to deploy that project. We'll probably get it done in 9 with the way things are going and how big these dollar costs are. But that's our approach to it from the HUD standpoint. And then we also have some pretty substantial ARPA dollars, and we're using that same approach with the ARPA dollars.
A lot of money out there.
There's a lot of money out there. The time is right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Eric, the South Carolina Office of Resilience is 2 years old. You guys have a 10-year, 11-year vision. How does nature-based solutions and nature-based projects fit into the overall funding stream of it? What proportion is gray versus green? Do you guys look for green infrastructure projects, or is it just, if it's a good application, we fund it?
We do. Our scoring matrix now for our projects, out of the 100 points, green infrastructure gets you 20 points, if depending on what that percentage is of the project. And if you're a low to moderate income community, you're also there at 20 points. The BCA itself is 20 points. So, when you look at over 100 points, LMI and green get you well on your way to a successful project. So that's really important to us, the way we've set up our kind of rack and stack matrix. And to more directly answer your question, Johnny, green is huge in resilience planning. And the entire approach to our resilience plan that our planning team led by Alex Butler is undertaking is to grow smart in the state. Let's not build in areas where we maybe shouldn't be building and have all the vulnerabilities identified All planning is local, so you got to get to your local planners to maybe not put that housing development in a floodplain and elevate it, and then get in a fight with the builder and your planning board about whether it should be a 2-foot elevation or a 3-foot elevation. And if y'all know the project I'm referring to, it's in a county that rhymes with Maury, and it's just a nightmare. So let's just be smart. Look at where the threats are, and let's design around those as we go forward. So I hope I answered the question. Mm-hmm. It's a huge part of it. The resilience planning team, conservation is a big thrust of what we're doing. It's a big thrust coming from the governor's office. I think Governor McMaster has said numerous times that he wants a huge percentage of the state put under conservation and for us to grow smart. But we're a net growth state, so we got issues and competitive issues to deal with when we talk about the economics. And we're not losing population, we're a growing population. And I think for a few, Dale's nodding his head, we've done this a number of times, right, Dale? But Horry County will be up over 600,000 people here by 2040, I think. And they're going to be net 260,000 people. So a lot of competitive factors that all work into the equation, but it's about growing smart, and green is a huge part of it.
We've got a couple more before we open it up to the rest of the group here. I'm curious from everyone again, how science and data plays into the application process, and maybe what resources are out there for communities to access that.
Well, when designing these projects, science and data is very important, but there are other elements. Obviously, you need that information. It's going to play in also for the larger projects for monitoring, but I do want to also add that stakeholder engagement and every step of the process, regardless of where you are in the pipeline, is also just as important to add with the science and the data. And I want to make that point because many of these grants we're talking about, these project opportunities, really have to include multiple parts of the community. And getting the science and the data and those who need that information, along with translating it to the community, having it accepted and understood, is a really important piece of these project proposals.
I would echo that, and I think that is part of the earlier thread, that sometimes the need to try to do research and compile data and do analysis and things like that can be daunting for some of these applicants. And so to Eric's the contract that SCORE's offering to help with technical assistance on applications, we've looked at doing a grant-funded project just so we can create kind of a consortium to help with technical assistance and maybe draw in some of our institutions of higher education to be part of that, so that we can target some expertise and analysis toward some of the science and data piece for to support, say, the BCA or the design for some of these types of nature-based projects.
Yeah, I'd say anytime, anytime you can, bolster your argument and back it up with some science or some data and see the reader or the, agency can see where you're coming from with your ideas. I could say from the, programs that I represent, we leave that pretty wide open as to what argument you want to make. Especially recently with, we've kind of been delving into the underserved communities, and our approach to the application process was to ask the applicant, how do you measure social benefits? This came up before when you were speaking of measuring those social benefits. Now, NOAA fisheries people, there's not a lot of social scientists there. So rather than defining it, we turned it over to the applicant. And, you could see a range of effort there. Maybe some applicants found a social scientist to help them structure how they want to capture the benefits. Like I said before, other ones will completely ignore it. So, and then there's just a lot of basic science behind the fisheries benefits. You know, there's, again, the programs I represent are probably more specific than, say, nature-based or green. I think we're under that umbrella, but we also want like specific fisheries information. Like, tell me that that marsh is gonna, you know, how's that gonna affect shrimp or particular species? And that's real specific to, you know, this NOAA fisheries funding. So, yeah, I think somebody said too, you know, pick up the phone and find your local fisheries expert if you don't know that. Most people don't know that information, so.
May I just add one more thing? I think it's relevant to this. So one thing when it comes to research in certain things like this particular fund, if you start gearing your application, your proposal towards just a research, it's not going to be as competitive. But reaching out to what studies have been done, and if you can't find it, if you're a community who doesn't have the access to those resources that's mentioned, there are people like field liaisons that people don't often use. There are websites with lots of links, and people just don't go to them. So the data oftentimes and the research is out there and it's done, and it's a matter of just citing that and having access. But it is available, and if you ever struggle, just pick up the phone, call your program manager, or do what Liz did to reach out to NIFWIF, and here I am, right? I mean, just look, the resources are there.
And if I could just follow up real quick.
Sure.
We've recently have this underserved communities focused and money set aside, like you mentioned, the Justice 40. So our program responded by putting monies aside for underserved communities. I think I lost my train of thought there, but yeah, go ahead. I'll come back to it.
You sure? just interrupt if it comes back, right? No problem. That whole piece of communication and making sure you know what information's out there is really key. We have mapped on our resilience plan that's in the draft stage right now. It's on our website. In our vulnerability assessment, we've got the social vulnerability index mapped out. We've used social vulnerability index for our targeting and our disaster recovery program. So if you're one of those communities, you can just look on the map and see where you are. And if you're not familiar with it, I encourage you to talk with Dr. Susan Cutter at the Hazards and Vulnerability Research Institute at USC, the USC, talk to her, and she does a terrific job with that. We've consulted with her many, many times on our action plans in using SOVI for our targeting for various projects.
Okay, well, does anyone in the audience have any questions? Yes.
Quick, I remembered what I was going to say.
Okay.
I wrote it down this time. With our underserved monies, we don't ask for science and technical information. We know the community doesn't have the capacity to provide it. So the beauty of this funding is basically we're asking those communities that need help, like, tell us how we can help build capacity. Like, if you need to go hire an economist or you need to hire a planner or a grant writer, do it, like, to set you up to do restoration. Like, so I think we put our heads together to realize those communities they don't fit into, you know, all our technical questions. They can't do it. So this is like a unique opportunity, and I hope places jump on it. So, because I don't know how long it'll last. It's a unique time.
Yeah, and I hope other agencies jump on that sort of a train as well. Yes, sir.
Can the panelists address the role of elected officials in terms of moving these projects along? How important are they? What is their role?
They're obviously vital, and I think different communities, different trajectory in terms of the learning curve to get elected officials on board with the benefits. So in some cases, it may be a long-term education effort to help them understand the value not only for quality of life, but hazard mitigation, as well as financial value. So they're hugely important, and we know that all of these mitigation decisions primarily happen at the local level of government. There may be federal dollars available, there may be federal guidance, but those local elected officials are key, and so that's a big area of work to bring them along to what the benefits of hazard mitigation in general are, but also specifically nature-based solutions.
That education piece is really critical. We have, in our buyout program, we've run into issues where local governments don't want their citizens to be bought out because they think they're going to lose their tax base. And you sit there and go, they don't want the property that we're buying out because we're not the holder of the property. It would go to the local government or maybe another state entity. But it's so short-sighted to take that approach when you're keeping someone in harm's way repetitively. But that is a roadblock that we end up running into in some communities because they're so tied to their what little tax base they have in underserved communities that they think any house you buy out is more dollars out of their annual budget. And it's a real difficult education piece to work through that.
We've had success in getting elected officials to come on the ground and see projects. I think no matter what background or their philosophies are, even if they don't like the word nature or green, if you can get them to the site to see it and then speak their language, speak in dollars, and talk about, and we're in a good position now too of just these resilience benefits. Everybody wants to alleviate flooding and these problems. I don't think there's anybody against that. So to get them on the ground, stand there, and then bring your partners and bring the community. I mean, I've seen examples of maybe like a resistant politician, get on a boat and get taken to a site, and they can't say they don't like it. I mean, it's all spelled out in front of them. Money, the dollar figures, the benefits, your constituents are clapping, so who knows how they'll vote later on. But
I'll just quickly add that although everything I heard is absolutely, and from my perspective, right on the money, but don't not apply because you don't have a letter from an elected official to support your proposal. Don't do that. Get the local organizations involved, get others who start with that education and you're building it. Most elected leaders don't say no to money coming in, especially when match is encouraged, not always required. So just work on that, but don't let that discourage you from applying.
Yes.
How are you getting the word to the unserved communities that these funds are available?
that's a good question.
How are we getting a word to
word,
underserved
okay.
communities that the funds are available? That's a great question, and we can certainly do a better job of that. For the grants we manage at Emergency Management Division, we typically work through counties and state agencies. So we send out the information that way. Because for these grants, it has to be a government entity or in some cases a nonprofit, but it can't be a community group or an individual that applies. So we're trying to reach out to those municipal and county officials. So we send, that's just email blasts, that's basically.
There's also, we've been fortunate in that our mitigation program is in the area where we've done our disaster recoveries on the housing side. So many of the communities already know us, but my goodness, the faith-based community is the way to get there. Local long-term recovery groups or volunteer organizations is the way to get there. If you can get one leader out of a local community, even a neighborhood leader, it goes a long way. And it's just about, not surging into the community, but being present and being able to identify who in there might have a voice that would help you with the issue that you're dealing with.
We've relied on a lot of our traditional grantees are the big organizations like Nature Conservancy or, the names we've relied on those partners to then, delve deeper into the community, find it. I mean, they can see, they're kind of waiting for the funding opportunities and they see this one and it says, oh, you need to identify, an underserved community. And so, this first time around, we really relied on them. And from what I saw, they did a pretty decent job of reaching out locally because I think it's hard for like a national, federal government to find that, maybe small rural community that doesn't have a voice. I mean, we recognize it's hard to get there, so.
And I'll encourage people to reach out to a group called Anthropocene Alliance if you have not engaged with them before. I work closely with them. There's also the Justice 40, the navigators that are available who do an amazing job. But Anthropocene Alliance has connected me with 20 different communities, and it just keeps growing, and they have grant writers and other things. So Groundworks is great. There are organizations that do a fantastic job if you're not able to connect directly. Anthropocene Alliance.
Today's spelling test.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say, we next spell
It actually does spell out exactly how you, yeah, if you're gonna call me on it later. I'll write it out for you.
Yeah, I just spoke to them yesterday. I mean, they reached out to me for an example, and on the phone, they had representatives from this small community that was in coastal Florida. So they, again, that was like I feel like they were like a national umbrella organization, but somehow they found the people in the community with ideas and brought them to us. So it was like a good connection. So
Last
that
year,
is a
they
good
held
group.
a workshop, brought in volunteer grant writers, put in, I can't tell you how many applications, just working with those grant writers who volunteered their time. I think that's tremendous. And I'm happy to forward any information. I didn't mean to plug a particular group, but they really are amazing.
I'm trying to phase this question, but is there any portion of your funding that supports kind of growing leaders for tomorrow with opportunities for some form of like paid internship, maybe even specifically thinking about underserved community members? Something I've heard is that there are young people that are graduating college and they're coming back to their small communities, but they're then leaving because there's not opportunities to stay within that community to work. So I'm wondering if there's any funding that could help support jobs maybe within your rounds that could grow their experience, but maybe also allow them to stay in their smaller communities. Is there anything like that? Or is this way off?
Not way off topic. Our grants administrator, Fran Veracali, sitting right there, raise your hand, Fran, went after an AmeriCorps grant for a planning grant, and then if we are successful in that planning grant, in the next round, we'll be able to hire young folks locally to work within the watershed on those kind of issues. So that's kind of unique, but it fits exactly what you're saying. But we really don't, other than just having interns on board, it's not really, other than that grant, we don't have that program, but I'll say yet.
And under the mitigation programs we manage, you wouldn't necessarily, don't see a lot of that, but you could. You could have a project that involved interns or young professionals, and that would be part of a sort of their work to execute the project, but then they're also learning about the needs of underserved communities or whatever, and how to help them and provide the technical assistance for these types of projects. So it's certainly possible. We don't see a lot of that, but we have a previous grant cycle from several years ago project currently looking at critical infrastructure mapping in the PD compared to flood risk, and it's Clemson's working on it with us, and there have been a bunch of interns that have worked on those efforts as part of that project. So certainly possible, but we don't tend to see that used that much.
Really quick, I'm familiar with DHEC's Environmental Justice Program, mediation audit it's called, and they're out in the community. I think one of them is North Charleston, and attended this meeting who presented that was building up local leaders to learn about resilience issues and creating leaders so they can stay locally. Finding, I think part of finding the jobs and it's all kind of connected. So I was up with Keisha Long, I'm connected with her, but I think they're doing a lot of that work and they're going to have more funding coming along to do more of that type of work. So I don't know if that directly answers it, but just wanted to make you aware.
Is this a follow-on point?
Yeah, well, it's a new one. Everybody's looking for resources. Why don't we have a database of resources that we can interrogate instead of sending people off into the woods to find them?
As somebody, like, I would say, we've got so much data, and we'll make more databases. My quick reaction to your question is, I feel we need more human connection. I mean, find that person the data's out there. You don't need to go collect it again. You just need to find the person to get you to it. You can click around and dig around and drive yourself crazy, but.
And that's one of the things we were going to add. Just, I think all organizations probably have resources on their websites, right? But I think that's one thing we could look at, and we plan to do, is update our mitigation resources to link to some of these resources for nature-based solutions, and and partnership building and capacity building. So that we each kind of share the different kind of resources we're aware of, but we can link to each other's resource, databases and ideas and case studies and things like that. But I think we can do a better job of sharing information across all these organizations.
What part of, go ahead, Joy.
Oh,
Go ahead.
okay. So I just want to quickly say, when, back to the previous question, start thinking about what you are trying to do and word it in proposals as cultural assets. So, it's starting to be with funders, starting to think about the importance of, having that knowledge come back. And, we're working closely with tribes around the country, and, we're trying to change the way funders think, that the cultural assets are just so important giving back to generations. I wanted to make that point. The other point on resources, you've got a resource right in this room, Fran. She's the bomb, and I'm just saying she's way ahead of all of you, thinking about resources collecting for the state, and hoping she's very successful this year in her work. So please connect with her. And I just teed you up for promoting your colleague.
She's not that good. Don't let it go to her head. On the data piece, the data gathering, yes, Fran is a piece of gold from a resource standpoint. In the resilience plan, one of the criteria that the legislature charged us with is identifying the data gaps relative to flooding and relative to resilience. So that piece of trying to just aggregate it in our first several meetings, and I can't even tell you how many state agencies, nonprofits we now have involved with the resilience planning effort, because we wanted it to be a collective effort that everyone could buy into. I think it's 140 or 160 different entities or organizations involved. One of the first steps was to collect the data and just ask, particularly for the state agencies, what is the data that you hold, that you rely on in deploying your mission? And it was difficult. It still is difficult, because many state agencies want to hold on to it, because that becomes their mission and their power and their funding source. But it's just an identification of the data, so that how can you manage any situation if you don't know what your data is telling you? And our own planning director was in DHEC, and he found out about databases that could have been relevant to him in his job when he was at DHEC that he did not know existed. And I'm not picking on DHEC, it's a big organization, but it's those kind of things, and it's the communication, EMD and our office, I think, are just doing a really good job of sharing information with each other and supporting each other on the various programs where we can help each other out. But that communication piece about the data, like you said, it's about the human connection too, but identifying where it is and at least having a sole resource. I mean, who knows where this is going to go? I mean, it's going to be an Amazon computer system or a Google computer system to at least identify all this once we get to that point.
Yeah. If I could follow up on that, I think, and this kind of ties back to an earlier question about a good proposal. I think, like, if you can find the funding source and then you find the agency and find somebody there, like at NOAA, you can talk to me. Like, there's people in this room who, every time they come up with a project idea, before they submit it, they call me up and tell me what they're doing, and allow me to help them tweak it or strengthen it, or strike that, or and they're professionals, and they even need me to interpret things as best as I can. Sometimes I don't know, but so that's going back to just a successful grant. Call the folks who have the money. Find the technical assistants on the ground. I bet you could find them, and that person would want to help. And it's even better when the money's not like you don't have 2 weeks, but you have a year. Call the person, take them out to the site, like scratch heads with them of how to do it. You'd be surprised how many people don't take advantage of that. Or I see a proposal from somewhere local, and I think, well, why didn't they call me? I know that person. Or why didn't they tell me? I could have told them. So.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, these agencies want to give the money out. They're not trying to hold on to it and eliminate you at any point that they can. I mean, they do want to to get the money on the ground.
Especially with like sort of novel approaches we're taking, like green infrastructure. Some of the resiliency, the definition of resiliency with NOAA fisheries might be different than what the one you put up on the screen. So it's hard to navigate this sort of newer gray area.
Liz?
Yeah, I'd like to make a point and then a pump quiz for y'all. But we strategically asked these people to be on the panels because the types of programs they fund runs a gamut, right? You've got hazard mitigation, you've got resilience, you've got habitat restoration, and so, but you can fit nature-based projects into all of these, right? So we kind of I just wanted to make this point. We've got it, we talked about it, but just highlighting that like these types of solutions offer multiple benefits. It's how you're couching it and how you're framing it and how you're writing it for each of these different programs. So just think about that, as we think about the multiple benefits and how we can kind of all work together and but fit it into the different programs. But the pop quiz for y'all is in 2 sentences. Through your programs, do you have a successful nature-based project in South Carolina that you could just say has been funded? And if not, why not?
We have a really great one that FEMA has selected for further review under the 2021 Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities program. So it doesn't have money on the ground yet, but it has been selected for further review. So once it goes through environmental review and that kind of thing, I think it'll work out. It's about the federal dollars on it are about $2.2 million. So that's 75% of whatever the total is. The last time I saw the BCA on it, the value was about $4.7 million, so that looks pretty good. But it is a 2-piece project. It's a Chestnut Bay floodplain restoration, and then creating a 7-8 acre park with a wetland to increase flood storage capacity, community park, and green space. So it incorporates a couple of different things to achieve wetlands recreation and floodplain management, and then also create community recreational space, open space. So I'm pretty excited about that project. I think FEMA's pretty excited about that project. Once they get it awarded, I think they'll publicize it pretty broadly because they really like it. So that's one. I think too, we've always done a good number of acquisitions, so residential acquisitions. So while those are not the exotic and complex nature-based solutions, they are nature-based in the sense that those properties will never flood that way again, and we have to repair the house and move the people out, and it creates green space that can't be built upon ever again. Although we did have a recent project recently where people put up a fence on property that had been acquired and demolished, and so we had to go through a whole rigmarole with FEMA about was the fence okay or not, and were they going to de-obligate the funds. I think we're good. Fence is okay.
So I guess I'll go quickly next and say that the fund has been only in existence for a few years. So although small projects, I mean, I'm not going to use those as an example, but what I want to do is look forward to 2022 awardees will come out very soon, and South Carolina did a very good job of really organizing themselves, and I have a lot of hope because of groups like this coming together, organizing themselves, and I have a feeling I'll be back often to organize and help support your proposals.
Liz, the greenest thing we're doing right now are the buyouts. Following what Emily said, we have $35 million in buyouts in our mitigation program. We'll probably do about $2 million in buyouts in our Hurricane Florence housing recovery program. And right now, we're evaluating the projects. Our ARPA application deadline closed at the end of October. We're way oversubscribed on that. We had 74 projects come in at $204 million, and we have about $60 million to allocate to that. So we're looking at those projects right now. I don't have that breakout for you. But the buyouts is really the greenest piece of it. And for example, in Cheraw, we're doing a 9-home buyout around a park. Those homes are just downstream of a Superfund site, and EPA and DHEC are really excited about us getting those folks out of the way, and that'll create a nice, entirely green area instead of checkerboarding some areas.
I want to talk about our equitable resilience project for EPA as well. That's pretty green.
Yes. Go ahead. This is a grant that Fran secured with the EPA.
EPA has a program called Equitable Resilience, and I think it's pretty green in the fact that we are tying it to a buyout through our mitigation buyout program in the city of Mullins. And they're gonna provide technical assistance to the community to do community outreach for when those homeowners, if they decide to do a buyout, voluntary buyout, what happens to that land, and to do green infrastructure design around what the community wants in those areas. It's a low to moderate income area, so I think it's a really neat project. We're one of only a few in the country, I think, that's receiving this technical assistance. So we are forward thinking, we're looking at that, once we do these buyouts, what happens? What happens to that land, that community, what's gonna be a community benefit? So I think it's a really exciting project, through EPA's Equitable Resilience project. So that's ongoing. People look out for that and the results of that.
Told you she was the bomb.
My answer to the question, we've done a lot of little projects all over. One that pops to mind that I think is easily accessible for folks who want to see at the end of Plymouth Park, at the end of Plymouth Road and Riverland Terrace. That project there, this goes back to the Recovery Act times. The city accessed money through NOAA with help from DNR, DHEC, to quickly put together a solution to an eroding shoreline there. The park at the end of the road, is wasting away these like beautiful grand oaks on the verge of, falling in the river. And I think that conventional wisdom is put a bulkhead here. And this goes back 10, 12 years ago. So we were taking a swing at nature-based stuff. And so the city worked really diligently, quickly. We had it was the Recovery Act, so it was all about stimulating the economy, so going fast. And it was amazing how quick the city worked, with their contractors to, and with me at the table to help tell them what's gonna fly and what isn't. Bulkhead's not gonna work, but we put an offshore sill there. It's on the cut. There's a lot of wave energy, there's a lot of boat energy. So we actually had to put a lot of rock offshore. It's like a mound of rocks, but behind it, we created habitat. Instead of just a bulkhead and water, there's a good log. We kind of graded it down, put in plants, oysters. The plants grew right back to the rock. I drive by there once in a while and stop and look to just see how it's changing. It's been 12 years, so we've learned a lot. But I think it was a good example too of when you have money and then you tell partners or a city, like, we need to spend it by this day, they'll figure out how to do it.
Go figure.
Great. We've got time for one more question.
So the development of green spaces can contribute to gentrification. So sort of what is the role of funding, or how can rural funding sort of promote green spaces while also not causing further harm to communities?
I don't know if I have an answer, but I just heard yesterday for the first time on that call with Anthropocene Alliance, the partner mentioned the word climate gentrification. And I wrote it down because I'd never heard it before. So obviously, I just wrote it yesterday, I don't have an answer. But maybe somebody else did.
I think that has to be on a case-by-case basis, but it's got to be a consideration in where are these people going, what is it going to do to the community overall? But I don't know, I certainly don't have an answer.
We struggle with that in our projects. Affordable housing is a critical need all over the country and in South Carolina. So we have a buyout project up in Bishopville, Bennettsville. I'm sorry. Thank you, Fran. Up in Bennettsville, and it's low-lying land. It was sold to the poor people because it was cheap land. These houses had flooded repeatedly, and if the cost of acquiring the house, even with the HUD allowed incentives, really doesn't afford them enough dollars to go somewhere else and have substantive housing. So it's a real conundrum that we deal with. And we're even thinking about using some of the mitigation funds and establishing affordable housing, working with the Bennettsville leadership. So, it's case by case, as Emily said. You just have to look at it and, see what the local appetite is and what the local desire is. But it is a reality of using these dollars in that way.
Do you think the buyout program is like expanding, or is it on a trajectory of, as the sea level rises, the funding?
Well,
go up?
it's all about the money, isn't it, when it comes down to it? I mean, it really is. So, in our Resilience Reserve Fund, I I say there's $44 million. It was funded one time. We're looking for various streams of income to come into that to allow us to do what the statute says we're supposed to be doing from a mitigation standpoint. So I think long-term, there will be dollars there. It's just an education piece with the General Assembly right now to see if we can secure a more substantial line of funding, both to help in what we're supposed to do in long-term recovery following a disaster, as the EMD manages the disaster, and then the mitigation piece that is available there in that statute. So we'll see.
Yeah, and on the acquisitions front, we've seen challenges in recent years, just, from federal funding. It takes a long time to get a project like that through the FEMA review queues. So you can imagine over the last few years, if someone agreed to a certain price to buy out their home 3 years ago or 2 years ago, and it hasn't happened yet, and now you're asking them to sign a form that's a voluntary certification, that you participated voluntarily, they're like, I need a bigger price. So we've had a number of our homes that we thought would be acquired drop off the map because it just hasn't worked out for the property owner the way they originally intended. So the economics of it get kind of wanky, especially if it takes a long time to get the project through.
Okay.
Before we wrap up, I just want to, I know many of you are aware of this, the Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities Grant Program, FEMA does it. It's an annual program now, but the deadline to have initial applications to us is this Friday, November the 18th. So we have until January to get them into FEMA. But I just want to note that because as we've all shown, there's a lot of money out there that's available for mitigation, for nature-based solutions, and this is a great time to get our hands on, especially federal dollars, and apply them to the benefits of our communities throughout the state. So whether you're ready to put in an application for BRIC for this Friday or not, it will come around next year. So start thinking about and encouraging the people who are your constituents or partners to think about applying next year. Because right now we have $2 million in a state set aside that we get to decide kind of who gets the projects based on eligibility criteria, of course. But then there's $2 billion in a national competition. So that's where those sort of larger, more complex or regional projects become very attractive. And that's where that Conway one was successful last year, was in the national competition. So I just want to put in that plug.
Well, thank you to all of our panelists, and look forward to engaging with you all in the break.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.